Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 22nd of June 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're also joined by David Scott and Robert Green, and they'll be talking to us by live video Skype link from, of course, north of the border in Scotland. Blue sky here today, Mike.
Absolutely, but dark clouds approaching apparently because, last November or October, I think perhaps it was, Donald Tusk, if you remember, was standing up in the European Council. And I paraphrase him slightly here, saying, "I will create an EU treasury by June and woe betide anyone who gets in my way." Well, a few people have gotten his way, but just as a reminder of what he actually said, let's just have a quick look at this.
I will do everything in my power to take the first very concrete steps by June towards establishing the European Monetary Fund and strengthening the stability of the banking union. I still believe that it is possible. In June, it will become clear if I am an incurable optimist. But one thing I can promise you today. If we don't reach agreement by June, I will say precisely why it wasn't possible and who is responsible.
I'm looking forward to finding out who was responsible and why it wasn't possible, because it hasn't been possible just yet. This was the document, and the question that we raised at the time was, what is the European Monetary Fund? That's still slightly to be decided, but for example, Wolfgang Schäuble, no longer German finance minister, but he said that a European Monetary Fund should be an Uber IMF, combining financial firepower and expertise in designing reform programs and taking over budgetary oversight of all EU countries from the European Commission. For others, like Spanish Finance Minister Luis de Guindos, the European Monetary Fund would be something more akin to European Treasury. So that is the European Treasury is more the model that Jean-Claude Juncker has as well. And alongside that, of course, comes the European Stability Mechanism, banking union, and so on. Now, why are we talking about this today? Well, because this week, Bruno Le Maire, the French finance minister, was using really the situation between the United States and Iran as an excuse for pushing forward this policy. He's saying that the European Union absolutely needs its own treasury. He's, of course, one of Donald Trump's biggest critics over Trump's decision to exit the nuclear deal with Iran. And he believes that French companies will stop operating in Iran because of United States sanctions. And these sanctions are on Iran, of course, but Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had said absolutely that we will hold those doing prohibited business in Iran to account. Anytime sanctions are put in place, countries have to give up economic activity. So the French are pretty upset about this. They don't want to give up economic activity in Iran. And so Bruno Le Maire saying they cannot be paid, this is the French companies, because there's no sovereign and autonomous European financial institution that can protect them from the sanctions. And he said that EU leaders have attempted to mitigate the impact of US sanctions on European businesses through a statute that they passed, which barred companies from paying fines, but that isn't really going to work. And so he has said, our priority is to build independent, sovereign European financial institutions that would allow financing channels between French, Italian, German, Spanish, and any other countries on the planet. It's up to us Europeans to choose freely and with sovereign power who we want to do business with. The United States should not be the planet's economic policeman, is what he said. Now, a bit ironic that the EU should talk about sovereign power at all, but there you go, that's what he said. But the point here is that, of course, this is something that David Ellis has been discussing quite a lot over the last couple of years, because it is all linked with European military union. And speaking of that, we have a short clip here from the Irish Parliament, where Catherine Connolly, who is an Irish TD, Jean-Claude Juncker was visiting the Irish Parliament and she had this to say.
President of the Commission, you're welcome here today and you have received a very hearty welcome. It's not the same thing as saying that we're all of the same opinion in relation to where Europe is going. Certainly it's increase on defence and going down the road of a European army, which you've clearly articulated. I am certainly a committed European, intimate connections with my family with various countries in Europe, but I will not stand over a European Union that's going down the militarisation route, a European army putting vast amounts of money into a European Defence Fund and agency, while at the same time becoming a fortress Europe. Yesterday we condemned the President of the United States, rightly so, with a unanimous motion. I condemn the European Union in the same manner for our approach to militarisation.
Well,
Pretty strong words.
My reaction to that, it must have been about 2 or 3 years ago, Mike, and I can't remember the lady's name, but there was a young lady stood up in the Irish Parliament there and spoke out very strongly. This lady is doing it. How is it that we haven't got this quality of people in Westminster?
A very good question, but perhaps within the military, things changing slightly. This is Julian Thompson. Is he still in charge of the Marines?
Oh no, good. No, he's retired officer. Yeah.
Right. Saying exactly what David Ellis has been saying for quite some time. The quote here, retweeted by Veterans for Britain, is that the current proposal is to stay in the European Defence Fund and the European Defence Industry Development Programme, which are in turn attached to significant further commitments under EU authority, stay in them, and we effectively would not have left the EU. It's not in the UK's interest to weld itself institutionally to this security ERM, that's exchange rate mechanism. He's drawing parallels with that. We should cooperate, not integrate with our European partners, and NATO provides us with the means to do that. But clearly NATO's policy in this area is that in fact European nations should amalgamate their defence efforts within the NATO structure, yes, but they are a bloc as opposed to individual member states. So we seem to be seeing some movement here.
I think this is very significant, Mike, and I'm going to say it nicely in this case because Julian Thompson has done a lot of good work, but many of the very senior officers, they're sort of embedded in the establishment. They believe that good men and women serve the Conservative Party, and it's taking them a lot of effort to break out of that mentality and start to look at things afresh and say, well, actually, Theresa May is simply lying to the British nation, talking Brexit, but stitching us into this unified EU military structure. But at least this man's moving in the right direction.
Yes, and in the meantime, The Sun has this headline: Theresa May sparks fury by refusing to confirm if Britain will remain a Tier 1 defence power. And of course, this is part of what we've been saying for quite some time, because the military in this country being hollowed out from the inside, and is it possible to be a Tier 1 defence power if in fact what you're doing is joining EU military structures? But anyway, The Sun is saying that the Prime Minister clashed with Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson after querying if Britain should be leading the way in defence spending. She sparked horror across the forces when she refused to confirm Britain will remain a top-tier nation for defence. It emerged that the Prime Minister has clashed with her Defence Secretary by questioning the need, as I say. The term means having a full spectrum of capabilities, from nuclear weapons and aircraft carriers to submarines and special forces. But pressed by The Sun to reassure worried generals, the Prime Minister refused to repeat the all-important term Tier 1. Instead, she would only say, the reports that you have read are not correct. We will continue to be a leading defence nation. So she wouldn't use the term, which has a definition. She wanted to use some woolly term instead. But you have a feeling what that effectively means?
Well, I am pretty confident on this. If you want to be a Tier 1 military power, you've got to have nuclear weapons and you've got to have the means of delivering them. What we know is that in these very devious Franco-British Council meetings that took place in the residence of the British ambassador in Paris several years ago, part of that debate was combining our nuclear deterrent with the French. And what we've actually seen since those meetings is that all the movement is in place to hand our nuclear deterrent over to the French. So I think Theresa May is hedging her bets here because she knows that that is still the desired European policy. They want the French to be in control of the nuclear deterrent as the Central European nuclear power.
Okay, well, let's say welcome to David and Robert here. David, does the idea of an EU treasury give you a warm feeling?
I'm very interested in this concept of independence and sovereignty in matters financial. Now, I was looking at the debt figures and balance sheet figures for some of the banks. Deutsche Bank has a balance sheet of 45% of the German economy. And to put that into context, you compare it to Bank of America at 12%. It's enormous. So is that what independence and sovereignty means? That they're actually now so indispensable and so too big to fail that in fact they're more important than countries?
Yes, indeed. Well, yesterday, let's move on. Yesterday we mentioned that Professor Brian Jarman, Sir Brian Jarman on the BBC Radio 4 Today programme, he has followed that up with an article in the Daily Mail today, and just a couple of interesting quotes from that. He's saying more or less the same in general terms as yesterday, but he said the third step is for the NHS hierarchy and the Department of Health to publicise any association or connection with the secretive organisation Common Purpose, which, as this paper has revealed in the past, that's the Daily Mail, is a not-for-profit charity that provides leadership training for public sector managers. And it goes on to say complaints used to be made with some justification about Masonic influence in the public sector, especially the police and local government. Common Purpose seems to be a new version of this. Yeah. So that's pretty much pretty clear, and it's good to see at least one mainstream outlet taking him up on this.
Well, I think this is fantastic, Mike. Let's remember that the Daily Mail led to the original exposure in the mainstream press, at least those years ago. Can't remember how many it was now. I'm going to guess about
2013. It was
2013, yeah. Right? And they published 11 pages. The Telegraph followed. The Guardian even had some material. The Sun and I think the Mirror as well. But now we're back on the trail of Common Purpose because we're talking very serious issues. We're talking the breakdown of the NHS. We're talking about unnecessary deaths. And Sir Brian Jarman is quite rightly pointing a finger at Common Purpose, which has been boasting of its ability to get in and transform the management structure of the NHS, including using disruptors effectively. So for this now to come back in the mainstream is really excellent.
Quite a surprising public article in the Guardian here. It's actually a letter, but I'm pleased to see that they've published it. It's a couple of days ago they published this. Profit drives the UK child protection industry, and it's just worthwhile reading a little bit of this. They say the letter says social workers escorted by police take terrified children from their mothers every day. This is subheadlining. Headline right: Nina Lopez Jones, Anna Neal, and Kim Sparrow, many going into the 80% of children's homes and 40% of foster care that have been privatised. There's a widespread condemnation at Donald Trump. Separating immigrant children from their families, the letter says, but in the UK, away from the public gaze, social workers escorted by police take terrified children from their mothers every day. Louise Tickle urges a complete reset of attitudes in children's social care, away from removing children and towards supporting families. Our self-help mothers group receives calls daily from desperate women whose children or grandchildren have been removed or being adopted against their will. Forced adoptions are the highest in Europe on speculative and biased assumptions of emotional harm and neglect. In a recent ruling, Judge Mostyn was scathing about 44 witness statement by a Carmarthenshire social worker, a 44-page witness statement by a Carmarthenshire social worker, very long in rhetoric, but very short in deed, and any concrete examples of where and how the mother's judgment had been deficient. Examples of emotional harm he rejected as inconsequential and trivial, including failing to take her son out for ice cream and to arrange for him to have a haircut. he liked, and so it goes on. I'd recommend people read this. Of course, it's echoing many of the points that we've been making for a very long time, Brian. I'm glad to see one judge taking a stand on this. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case across the system. The headline talks about it being a child protection industry, and I think that's exactly what it is.
Well, there's no question that that's what it is because of the huge sums of money. We calculated that for one court case for each of the 68,500 children in care, the average cost of that court case would be about £250,000 with all of the people involved. That gives you a baseline industry of 19 billion, and that is before you get into the sexual abuse and profiting of the children in pretty unpleasant ways. So this is a massive industry.
David, Robert, it's pleasing to see this type of thing appearing in the mainstream media, but although they've published a letter, there's still no proper investigative work being done in this area.
That's true. I think it is a significant point that the Guardian, right? This is a left-wing Guardian, and they've been traditionally pro the state and against the family. Such is the stench coming from the system now that they're having to at least publish a letter. I think it's a very significant point. It read like a UK column article, and more power to the writers of that. The idea of trivial cases being justified as reasons for removing children we're very well aware of, and we're seeing the risk of future emotional harm, the risk of future emotional harm being used to justify coercive state intervention in family life now. So this is really just the imagination of the official. It's nothing else.
Yes, I think it's important to point out that one of the key issues here is the secrecy element, in that when judges or social workers or police make false allegations against children, give false evidence, there's a gagging order usually placed by the judge on usually the mother, not always the mother, but usually the mother, that if they speak out about this quite obvious perversion of the course of justice, they will be thrown into prison. I have just written to Baroness Hale, the head of the Supreme Court, to ask if there is a defence if the gagging of, if there's an order to gag a witness, if that witness acts in circumstance of duress of circumstances, for example, to protect the lives of children or protect children from sexual abuse, then would that be a justifiable defence in certain circumstances, in Baroness Hale's opinion? I've only just written to her, but obviously it would be very interesting to get her reply, because if somebody stands up against these gagging orders that actually obviously only help to pervert the course of justice, that will be a great step forward. Somebody will need to have the guts to do it. Maybe somebody in the media will have the guts to do it. But this secrecy and silencing of witnesses has to come to an end in the family division.
Couldn't agree. Sorry, I couldn't agree more there, Robert. This is the star chamber, the gulag system of the family courts. Let's move, staying within the subject, but move on to Melanie Shaw, because we have some news about Melanie. Really just putting this on screen so that people can see her photograph if you haven't seen her. This was taken quite a few years ago, and I have to say that Melanie's prison time has really taken a toll on her. Of course, Theresa May we have to bring into the frame because she was Home Secretary at the time Melanie was sentenced. Melanie went through secret court hearings which put her in prison, and it was recently that we were able to say, document is top left. We've shown this more clearly before, but this is the document which says that Melanie should have been released on the 2nd of this month, 2nd of June 2018. She didn't appear. We can now tell you why. We've been informed that Melanie Shaw is now being held in HM prison style on remand, and that the remand status is based on serious charges following incidents in prison, and a date for a court hearing has yet to be set. This is deeply worrying because Melanie was talking to us in some of the letters that she managed to get out about being harassed and bullied and threatened by prison staff. And so we have little idea what took place around her, but we do know at one stage Melanie was extremely frightened at the actions of particularly some of the male warders. I'll come back onto that in a minute. But this is the other bit. We also understand that there are indications that the state agenda this time is to get her committed to psychiatric care. So I have to say that we are now extremely worried about Melanie Shaw's position, because of course in the prisons that she's experienced to date, including Peterborough, not only Style but Eastwood Park, Melanie has talked about being followed by sometimes up to 5 warders, men and women. She had to leave the door open while she went to the toilet, even with male warders present. She's talked about being threatened in her cell. She's been denied medical treatment, and she spent over 18 months in solitary confinement. We believe that all of those tactics were designed to break down her mental state. If something has now taken place in prison, we say there should be a full and open inquiry into what has happened around Melanie Shaw. We are very, very concerned that she's going to go back into another secret court case where the public and her lay legal team will be denied access, and probably the press will be denied access. That is the most we can give you at the moment. We do know some other information about the charges, but we feel at the moment it's not our place to talk about that. But everything seems to be lining up to say that Melanie Shaw is going to be kept in prison or in a psychiatric unit. Our guess is until the whole of the independent inquiry on child abuse is finished, and then of course Melanie can be simply dumped off to one side. If anybody wants to write to Melanie at the moment, here's her address back up on screen: Melanie Shaw, A4126 DE, HMP Style, Wilmslow, Cheshire, SK9 4HR. David and Robert, no doubt you'll want to respond to this, but it's been clear at the outset that the veracity of Melanie Shaw's evidence about the abuse of children in Beechwood Children's Home, Nottingham, and she has always maintained children were murdered there. The British state is desperate to silence this woman.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. If I may make another suggestion to people watching, I would contact Amnesty International. I've tried to contact them on a number of occasions in the past, and they really don't respond to my concerns about the human rights breaches, the violations against Melanie Shaw. It seems that Amnesty International are only interested in violations that do not involve the British government. That is not good enough. They're there to represent everybody in any country of the world. So I would urge readers, I don't think you'll get necessarily too far with the prison, although it does help a lot if people write in. I'm not deterring or trying to deter anyone from writing to HMP Style. I've done it several times myself. But I think a massive attempt of involving Amnesty International would be very useful and would certainly put a goal of pressure on the British government. And that pressure needs to be applied as quickly as possible.
Okay, Robert, thank you very much for that. I'll say some people are asking in the chat box about Melanie's legal team. This is one of the great problems that we've had, is that when Melanie sacked her legal team in court because they were simply not representing and not protecting her, not taking her instructions, the judge simply appointed another team. So Melanie at the moment is represented by a law firm she did not want, and the judges has kept the lay legal help out of prison. The lay legal help that Melanie does want, the judges kept them out of prison. So this is where we see judges running star chambers, because this is out of sight of the public, and basically we've got procedures which the judge is creating as they go along. So raising money for a legal team doesn't help at the moment, because we can't get legal help alongside Melanie, because the court itself simply decides who's going to represent her. I'll just end on this note. Sorry, David, I can see you're interested in coming in. Just let me finish this one. Somebody highlighted a couple of days ago that Common Purpose was active in Style Prison. This is part of Common Purpose Facebook page where they're boasting that one of their coaches is now operating in Style. I find this of great concern, particularly after the worries over Common Purpose operating in the NHS, but we're waiting for more information.
David.
Well, I was just to say, it is the Gulag state. That's the Gulag Archipelago is the book to read to see how this is done. It's exactly the same tactics, and it's heartening to see so many people in Britain waking up to this. A lot of the protests regarding Tommy Robinson have been recognising that Melanie Shaw and Melanie Shaw's story is at least of equal, if not greater, significance. It's all part of the same picture of official cover-up and of the use of the criminal justice system to target people who have the courage to speak out. So there are more and more people becoming aware of Melanie Shaw and of the significance of her story and her case.
Thank you, David. Now, the question is what to do about it. Well, look, something that we thought would be a useful thing to do. We spoke with Ned Pamphilon, the fantastic artist, and to see what we could do. And we decided we would produce some postcards, and these are now available on the UK Column shop, and depending on how many you buy, of course, depends on the cost. But look, what we would like people to do, if you're willing to do it, is to get hold of a pack of 5 or a pack of 10 or whatever. There's space on the back, as is normal with a postcard, to put a message on. Get postcards about Melanie Shaw to your MPs, to your councillors, to Amnesty International, to the mainstream media, to whoever that you think should receive it. With a personalised message on it. I mean, we're not going to suggest what you should write on it, other than to say that it be.
It's more powerful if it's a reasonable, focused comment.
Right, and of course, because it's a postcard and your message is clearly on the back, then people that are working for the post office get to see it. So it helps spread the word, and I think it would be a pretty powerful statement to make. We've also produced one for anybody that wants to campaign on the situation with city trees being chopped down around about the country. Those are the first 2. If there's any interest in actually using these for actually campaigning, then we'll do some more. But we'd be very interested in seeing what effect that might have if people took that up as an active campaign.
Yeah, and these communications to officials and MPs, a lot of people say to us, I wrote to my MP, but I didn't get a reply. This is often the case, but don't assume that because that happened, your letter didn't make an impact. The letters make an impact and can actually achieve a great deal, as can emails, but it needs the volume of members of the public, particularly within each constituency. If several thousand people in a constituency are going for the local MP, you can be sure that MP is paying attention, because they know what's coming next. Is they're going to lose their seat?
Right, just a few reminders. First of all, Ian Crane's crowdfunder for to go into court to deal with the fracking injunction legal challenge. This is the Cuadrilla injunction, which is attempting to prevent any legitimate protest at Cuadrilla fracking sites. And of course, the concern is, and the likelihood is, that if they should win this injunction, that would set a precedent. So this is a very important effort by Ian and the other people involved. And if there's any way for people to support, please do get involved in that. Reminder that AV9 DVDs are available on the UK Column website at this price only for 1 more week. So get hold of yours if you can. And the Reverend Andrew Ashdown speaking in the Rye Bakery in Frome tonight. Andrew Ashdown absolutely deserves support because he is doing some fantastic work in Syria and promoting Syria. So please get along to that if you can. And finally, David and Robert, obviously the Fresh Start Foundation, you are both involved. Robert, you're speaking. Just give us a brief update on this.
Well, this is very interesting because this is Aberdeen. there's already been threats made on social media by certain parties with an interest in Satanism that Robert Greene will be arrested if he goes to Aberdeen. And it's obviously been a concern that what happened before, there's an existing non-harassment order on Robert. It's essentially perpetual, and it names the people, or some of them, that Holly Greig named as abusers, and it puts a requirement on Robert not to harass these people in any way. Now, what happened before was he was convicted under this order of contravening this order, ultimately because he sent one letter to Alex Salmond's constituency office, which is an Aberdeen postcode, and that seemed to be enough. Now, during the run-up to the trial on that, and when Robert was on remand, the information that was put forward by the state, by the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, was very voluminous. It might surprise you, gentlemen, to find out that there was 666 pages of evidence, precisely, against Robert, and it was principally nonsense. So there is a concern that there would be malicious allegations. There is a concern that there would be claims that Robert's doing things that contravene this order. So I think it's worthwhile just being absolutely clear. Robert's going to Aberdeen to speak on behalf of the Fresh Start Foundation. He's going to speak on subjects to do with campaigning, to do with protecting children in the general sense, and to do with how the establishment works to cover up crimes and to target whistleblowers. He is not speaking about the Holly Greig case. He's certainly not going to mention any of the people named in the order. He's not going to harass anyone. He's not even going to be talking about his own case, because that's now with the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission. So it's essentially sub judice, and we're hoping that that goes back to the High Court for an appeal. So there is absolutely no reason for any action to be taken against Robert Greene. The Fresh Start Foundation, as you know, will not be naming anybody accused of anything unless either it's been convicted, or it's been published in the press, or it's been indicted by a grand jury. So we are standing on the law and we are acting absolutely lawfully, so there's no reason for any intervention there. So we feel we're safe, but if anything happens to Robert Greene in Aberdeen, everyone should know that it's absolutely nothing to do with anything he has said or we have said. If any action is taken against him, it's for entirely unlawful reasons.
Okay, thank you, David. Now, you have published an article on the UK Column website today. Well, it's actually dated May, but we just published it today. This is a talk that you gave at a previous Fresh Start Foundation event, Scotland's Secret Shame.
This is pulling together some threads of information we've already received, and it was done very much on the spur of the moment, but sometimes these things are best done that way. And it looks at how the system operates and how the silencing of whistleblowers, of people who want to fight against child abuse, and of the abuse of those harmed by abuse themselves actually works. It looks at how the system has made children into currency. And it's essentially where we are today in the Fresh Start Foundation in understanding the thing that we're investigating and understanding the fight that we're in. So I would ask people to have a look at that. It was it's a transcript made by Alex Thompson of a speech that I gave, very much off the cuff, but everything was fresh, and I think it comes across as a reasonable summary of where we are right now.
Okay, now let's just have a brief look at some Scottish news. And well, the issue of freedom of information in Scotland, this seems to be coming to a head now, where clearly, well, the headline there is SNP accused of breaking the law on the public's right to know.
Yes, this is fallout from the revelation that if you ask a freedom of information request in Scotland, particularly if you're a known troublemaker being journalist, campaigner, anyone who's caused the state trouble in the past, including my dear wife, actually, your Freedom of Information request gets circulated around a great many special advisors to the government, and the special advisors coordinate the response so that you're not getting the truth, you're getting the reduced truth that the government wants you to have. Well, it transpires that this is long-standing policy, and it also transpires, you see in these next headlines, the Scottish Daily Mail has made a major investigation of this, and it transpires, it's not just the central government. It is in fact the quangos, and it is in fact the Scottish local governments who are doing exactly the same thing. So there is a concentration of effort by the state to prevent the Freedom of Information Act operating as it's intended, and to prevent the public knowing what has been done to them and in their name.
David, I'll just add to that as a reminder, really, for our audience, that of course it was this political charity, Common Purpose, that was actually working with local authorities, compiling a blacklist of people who dared to contact their local city council or local authority to ask how much they'd spent on Common Purpose. So Common Purpose broke the laws under Freedom of Information in that it was collecting data. They were sort of censured for doing so, but nevertheless, they were so desperate to keep their finances secret that they compiled a blacklist by collaborating with the Freedom of Information teams in local authorities. And some of the letters that are posted on cpexposed.com refer to this and show this sort of rather chummy relationship between the charity and the FOI team in the local authorities. So this is something which hasn't just cropped up in Scotland. It's been going on for many years, and it's clearly it's a designed system.
Yes, we should remember that the greatest regret that Tony Blair ever had was the Freedom of Information Act. And that tells you all you need to know.
Robert, what's your experience of freedom of information in Scotland and in the UK in general, actually?
Well, it doesn't normally exist in any important case. So if there's something really important that goes on that might incriminate senior people in the government or the legal system or police, you will find that almost certainly your request will be blocked in some way after being sort of led around the houses for many times. What I would just like to say, I know we're very limited to the time we have today, but as David mentioned, I've got a formal complaint into the SCCRC, that's the Criminal Cases Review Body. And although we've put a lot of very good information in with great assistance from David, there is some crucial information that is currently being withheld by the Scottish Courts Tribunal system, which is crucial to my defence. I'll mention just one very brief to do with audios and transcripts, and I'll mention this very briefly and how it came about for those who don't know about it. We decided, my legal team and I decided that a crucial witness for the defence at my trial in 2012 should be none other than Elise Angelini, the former Lord Advocate of Scotland and former colleague, ministerial colleague of Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. When she was cited by my QC, Andy Lamb, she refused to attend on oath, to speak on oath in court. And the judge, the sole judge, I was denied a jury, Sheriff Principal Edward Bowen, then proceeded to agree with Angelini and allow her not to appear as a witness for me, even though it would have been of great strength. One of my legal advisors earlier had said that Elise Angelini, if called, would not have to answer questions that might incriminate her. There was a previous QC called Gary Allen, who I subsequently sacked for not taking my instructions, but he made the remarkable revelation about this, about she didn't need to answer questions in case she incriminated herself, which you could see already meant that he probably felt there was something that would incriminate her. And I thought it would be of great value to have the former Lord Advocate of Scotland in the witness box on oath, refusing questions in open court that might incriminate her. I thought that would help my case enormously. Anyway, Angelini refused to come, and Sheriff Bowen supported that refusal. Now, on the 24th of January, of course, as I predicted he would, because I was not being dealt with fairly in any way at all, decided to convict me. And then I had to attend the sentencing hearing on the 17th of February 2012. in that time, I had discovered that Sheriff Postal Edward Bowen had for 10 years been over the same business, the Northern Lighthouse Association, for 10 years with Elise Angelini. He was a business colleague of his, and he had concealed this from the court. So when I went for the sentencing hearing, I challenged the SP Bowen immediately on this, that he had concealed evidence, and felt that he should recuse himself and should never have allowed to take the case in the first instance. He got very angry about this, and then came after about a 15-minute break, came back into court and made a terrible character assassination on me, completely in conflict to all the expert witness evidence on which I had relied. It wasn't my opinion; it was the expert witness evidence that was on the Holly Gregg case that was of importance. During the course of this attack on me, he seemed to lose control and uttered the words to this effect: "How dare you, an Englishman, come here to Scotland to tell us what to do? We know how to run the justice system here in Scotland." Now, consequently, I was jailed. He gave me the maximum sentence possible for a breach of the peace. And in due course, I received what was supposed to be a transcript of this sentencing statement. This deleted or omitted from the statement were these two crucial sentences about the how dare you, an Englishman, and we know how to run the justice system here in Scotland. Clearly, quite apart from all the other blatant bias, I believe, has been shown in the case against me by Sheriff Principal Bowen, the fact that he made a racially discriminatory comment about me would immediately cause him not to be suitable for the case anyway, because he was just demonstrating personal bias against me and should never have been allowed to do the case. Now, the key thing following that is that I got some support actually to try and get hold of this document, and an investigation was led on the orders of Lord Easy by Lady Anne Smith. And consequently, I went up to Lady Anne Smith, met her in Edinburgh as part of the investigation, and she claimed that the audio of this, and we knew that it was being recorded by audio, so it would be pointless to actually make an allegation about what Bowen had said unless it were true. We would just make complete fools of ourselves. And I asked if I could listen to this. She said, "No, there's nothing on that corresponds with what you've said, Mr. Green." I said, "Well, this was said in open court. I have already got a number of people who are in that court who actually heard what Bowen said. There's no question that he said it. Can I listen to this, please?" And she said, "No, you can't listen to it. You have to take my word for it that it isn't there." So I said, "Well, there's one of two things. Either the tape is faithful to what we heard in the court, and you are refusing to let me listen to it, disclose it, or else it's been tampered with, and I want to know." Anyway, Lady Smith was adamant that nothing could happen. I contacted my MPs, and they too, both my previous MP, who was David Mowat, the Conservative former Health Minister, and my current MP, the Labour gentleman Faisal Rashid, have both written to Lady Smith for a copy of the tape. She has refused both of my MPs as well as myself. And now this particular audio is actually crucial to my appeal to the application to appeal to the SCCRC, because that by itself would exonerate me completely, quite apart from all the other very, very contentious issues in the case. So it's very important we get this, and I do not think that a review can adequately take place until we have a copy of that particular audio. It's absolutely crucial, and Lady Smith has no right to keep this from us. The Scottish Courts Tribunal system should also have a copy of this, and at the moment they're dragging their feet on this as well. So it's a very important issue, and I'm standing on that. I don't think anything could possibly happen properly until this tape is revealed by Lady Smith.
So, Robert, what could actually be done to help that process along? Is there anything that anybody can do to help you achieve that? A
little bit difficult to say at the moment. The person, the legal officer who's dealing with this is a lady called Mary Claire Anderson, and she wants to bring it before the board by the 29th of June. Which doesn't give much time, as we've now had about 6 weeks of the Courts Tribunal refusing to hand over the evidence. So I have suggested that it's delayed by another month. Whether that will happen, I don't know. But we're going to be absolutely clear that nothing can really be decided about my fate until that audio is finally produced and examined independently.
Robert, thank you. Classic example of secrecy in the state, I would say.
Absolutely. Yes.
No question about that. Is an example of what David has been talking about before: secrecy, withholding crucial information. We talked about the Freedom of Information Act and so forth. This is an example of the degree in which the Scottish Government, official bodies, will do to suppress information that would be dangerous to certain senior people in the Scottish establishment. And there is absolutely no doubt that a serious crime has been committed by the falsification of solemn court evidence, in my case, at the sentencing hearing.
Okay.
I think we're just about out of time.
Could we squeeze in just one, Mike? Because I think David's very keen to talk about, if we can just, where are we? David, you were just going to give us a little heads up as to what was going to follow the named person scheme.
Yes, so this is just a taster, really. The No to Named Person campaign has done serious harm to the named person scheme. One little fact that's been become apparent lately is that the 300 odd well-being indicators that the state was using to assess every child in Scotland, they've disappeared. They're gone from the government website. But there's new, and this is all based on a pseudoscience of early intervention. It was a statement that basically when you're 3 years old, your entire life is mapped out by those early experiences. Therefore, the state must intervene early. This is another Blairism, as early as possible, when the child is a very young infant, or even before it's born, and the state was going to intervene in family life and sort out these problems to make us all better people. Now, this has all disappeared, but a new form of pseudoscience underpinning has raised its head. This is called ACEs, which stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So we're going to count your ACEs, and we're going to do something to you accordingly. It's not exactly clear what. So there's a new science being generated. Again, it comes from the United States. And this time we've got Hollywood involved. And there's a film here you see. And this has been produced by James Redford. And it says the resilience, the biology of stress, and the science of hope. So there we've got a science of hope. This is just a bit of a word salad, but the science of hope, which is coming from America, is going to affect how the British state and Scottish state interacts with families and moves against children. Of course,
you've got this linked. Sorry, David, you got this linked in here. If I bring this next one up, we can see all sorts of people involved with this. And I've also got one here that I don't think you have seen, but I loved this because it's talking about KPJRF Films. Join our partners and communities worldwide to advocate for the need for a trauma-informed America. I found this very, very dark stuff. And you know where it's going to go in Scotland, because everything is going to be integrated under this massive alliance. And as you pointed out, there were 32 pages of partners. But don't worry, it's an independent organisation.
Yes, the Alliance is independent. 2002, I think, is the number of partner organisations it's got in those pages. It's run, the chief executive is Ian Welsh. And Ian Welsh is also the independent chair of the government body looking into GIRFEC, the Getting It Right for Every Child and named person policy. And he's going to make sure that named person works effectively. So that's an independent inquiry right there. So yes, the Alliance, we're going to look at this in more detail, because the Alliance of these 2,000 organisations across Scotland is one of the factors that's going to mean that all organisations, third sector as well as state, have a common hymn sheet. They're all giving the same story. They're all treating families the same way. It's all state dictated. It's coming from the United States. It's coming from the deep state within Scotland, and it's not been voted for or discussed or wanted by the people and families of Scotland, but it's something that we're going to get anyway. So more on that in weeks and months to come.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We'll say we're out of time for today. If you've picked up on our report on Melanie Shaw, please help us at least inform other people by tweeting and spreading that information about Melanie. We say she forms a focal point. We, of course, remember all of the other survivors of child abuse, but Melanie Shaw at the moment really is an example of how bad it can be when the British state really puts the pressure on people for telling the truth. So if you can help us publicise this lady, please do. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Remember those postcards. And if you're not already a subscriber to UK Column, please consider taking out a subscription, as we can only do what we do with your financial support. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.